So let's keep plugging along. Now before we do anything, I would like to discuss a few more items that I think are important. So as far as when you're trying to name a field, again, it should really be intuitive and describe the info. If you have a student table, call it students. Don't call it like S286 or ABC. I mean, you really want to keep it in line with the information that it is containing. Now, as far as within the table, you have the fields or the columns, like I mentioned, and these fields have a data type, which really, and this is what I'm talking about here, it really defines what type of data can be stored within that field. So if you have a datetime field, sure, you can create you can store things like birthdays in it, or employee start date, employee end date. Okay, keeping in line, if you have a integer field, okay, which is int is what it stands for, it can contain numeric information. Okay, so it is important to choose the data type that is appropriate. If you are trying to store numbers, don't use a varchar, which is the text field in SQL. Use an integer. If it's going to have decimal type information, I mean, use a float or a real. Okay. Also, another thing is a field size is really important. Okay, if your field, maybe let's just use state as an example. Okay, so if you're using to store something like AZ or TX, which is where I live, you don't need to make the field varchar 20. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, because all you're doing is you're storing 2 characters in it. And this thing really becomes an important item, like I mentioned, as your database grows bigger and bigger for the performance and scalability, things like the field size does add up over time. Okay. Next point is a primary key or a PK. Basically, in a table, is what uniquely identifies a record. Okay. And I've already mentioned this. Social Security can be a primary key identifier for just about anything. Employee table, patient table, student table. Now, related to primary key or PK, there's another thing called a foreign key or FK. Okay, and this is really a field in the child or the secondary table that maps to the primary key in a parent or primary table. Okay, we will talk about this in later training videos. In fact, I will have a session just on this. And then finally, we have constraints on fields. These are necessary for data validation. Okay, so if you have a social security number field, you can only store numeric. You cannot put things like A, B, C, D, E, F within that field. So then we are going to basically look at how to create a table within SQL Server 2012. Again, we are going to use the college database. Actually, I got this wrong. I have to use school database. I apologize for that. We are going to create the first table, which is going to be teachers, using SQL Server Management Studio. Next, we will enter some data, and then after that we are going to use Transact SQL, and we will create the students table. And for that one, we already have a script, which is students-basic.sql. We will use SQL insert command to put data into students table, and we have already a file for this one. And then finally, we will show you some of these commands using the template browser. So let us go ahead and switch to the Management Studio. I will go here, and I think I can close this one. I don't need to do that anymore. So as far as the school database, like I had mentioned, right now we don't have any tables. I will refresh, make sure that we don't have that. And as far as creating a new table in Management Studio, you can simply right click on the table and select new table. Okay, this pretty much, if you have used Microsoft Access, this should look very similar. And I am going to basically start typing away. For today I'm using upper caps basically. It doesn't really matter. SQL Server for the most part is case insensitive. Okay, now like I had mentioned that when you're naming the field or the column name, you need to be intuitive. Okay, so the first field typically in a table is a primary key. Since this is a teacher's table, I am going to call the first field teacher underscore or underbar teacher ID. Okay, this is going to be our unique identifier. Now remember the data type for us for now, I'm going to create a varchar, which basically stands for variable character, and the data size that I'd mentioned, for now we will just go with 8. Okay, now this last item where it says allow nulls, we will want to uncheck this. What that means is that this field has to be populated. Okay, you cannot leave it blank. You may have a situation where you have a field, let's say middle initial. I do not have one since my parents didn't pay attention coming up with one. So if my information is sitting in a table with a middle initial, that would be blank or basically null, which actually means it's missing information or not identified. Okay, anyway, moving on, I'm going to enter let me go ahead and enter a couple of fields just to kind of show you how this is done, and then I'm actually probably going to pause the video, the session, and then we will continue. But basically, so the next field is last name, varchar 30, which is okay, and then we can go ahead and allow null for that one. In a similar fashion, we can do first name again. What you can also do is you can copy paste this, by the way, if the field happens to be the same. Let's do another one called gender code. Okay, and for this one we'll go either male or female, so this should be varchar really 1 because that's all you're storing in there. And I'm going to go ahead and type some of this information. I will pause the training video and we will be right back when I'm about done with it. I am about done with this table. I have the last field, which is the email, in here. I'm going to pick varchar 50. So let me go through this, and then I'm going to actually point a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. But so let's look at the fields. We have the teacher ID, which remember is going to be not null basically, which means it is required. Everything else except for the active flag down here is optional. We have the last name, first name, gender code, birth date, which you'll notice I used a DATETIME for this, social security number, which is a varchar or varchar 9, race code, active flag we are requiring, which means you have to make sure that either the teacher in question is active or inactive, and we're using an integer, so we could use something like 0 for inactive and 1 for active. We have a department ID, which is going to be a foreign key to the department table, but we'll talk about that in a separate video. It's also an integer. We have an address 1, address 2 field, city, state, zip code, phone 1, phone 2, and email. Okay, now I have not saved this table yet. I haven't even named it, but before I do that, let me point a couple of things to you. You could also, when you're changing information in a table, you have this pane, I guess, called column properties on the bottom, and you can modify certain things in here. So for example, for the active flag, we would like to have a default value excuse me, of 1 in here, which means that if we somehow miss this when we're trying to insert information, it will just give it a value of 1. Okay. Another thing we can do is we will talk about constraints in detail, but let's say that we are in here and we don't really have any department ID which is greater than 8. Okay, I could come in here and basically